Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back. So, does more RAM and a fast SSD improve the speed of your computer? The short answer to that is yes, it will. The more RAM, the merrier. The faster the SSD, the faster things can launch for programs, the faster and smoother they run. Also, if you're looking at video editing purposes, the faster your exports are going to happen, or rendering, okay? Because you do need a fast SSD for all of that. You also need fast RAM, but you need more RAM as opposed to faster RAM. So the little trick to RAM is simply when it comes to the speed of the RAM, for example, okay? Whatever speed your processor is, you should have that in the equal as possible to speed with your RAM. Your RAM should be the equal speed or greater than what your processor is. This way you remove the bottlenecks, because if your RAM is slower than what your processor is, it does create a bit of a bottleneck. Now, improvement as far as performance goes to matching or exceeding with your RAM speed to your processor's maximum speed, that's usually only a couple of percent, but it is something that may be noticeable to you before you even decide to upgrade the speed of your SSD. Now, in the case of a Macintosh computer, like today's Macs, okay, so Apple Silicon, for example, it's unified memory, it has a fixed speed point, and that's all there is to it, right? Now, the more RAM you have in a Mac, the faster programs can actually launch, because there are programs that demand more RAM than others, all right? But there's a lot of things you were never told on any of these other videos. I may have mentioned it on previous videos where I've separated these two entities, but I thought I'd do a combined thing this time. And I know my eyes look a little shifted because I am shooting with my iPad, and I also want you to be able to see the screen here as well. But nonetheless, the more RAM, the merrier. Now, as far as the speed of the processors go in the Macs, in the M1, for example, like I have two M1s here, they both have 8-core processors, and they're split processors, so they're 8-core. You got 4 performance cores, 4 efficiency cores. Now, your efficiency cores are used for low-line tasking, like, you know, you're going to be surfing the internet, or you're going to be, you know, part of that is doing email, obviously. So web browsers, okay? Web browsers are going to run on efficiency cores, right? Typing programs are going to run on efficiency. Zoom or FaceTime chat, that's going to run on efficiency cores, right? And they're 3 gigahertz apiece, which is not bad, okay? Our performance cores are rated at 3.2 gigahertz apiece, so that gives us an extra 200 megahertz per core. So those cores are only used for high performance tasks like video editing, and as such, even for a lot of your games that are going to be a more demanding game, it's going to go to performance. Less demanding game stays in the efficiency side. And the same thing would work on a PC as well. Now, more and more PCs are coming out with efficiency and performance cores, the majority of which are efficiency, okay, in most cases, right? You still have Windows computers that are built with all performance level cores, right? Where you have a base clock frequency and a turbo, because Windows computers are still on x86 technology, antique stuff, okay? And they're going to remain that way for quite some time yet, until they get ARM technology in their control, where it's actually going to be good enough to be used in, you know, for video editing, for heavy-duty tasking, for gaming. And Windows World is going to experience the same problem with gaming, as a lot of manufacturers are not going to want to do games for ARM, for Windows, just like they did to Apple, okay? So count on having a really crappy experience for quite a while when everything goes straight out ARM. So try and run your x86 machines as long as you possibly can, you know, and that's going to be dictated to, obviously, by Microsoft. They're eventually going to come to a point where, hey, look, this Windows version is only for an ARM chip. That's it. We're not supporting x86 anymore, so you're screwed. We'll give you some more security updates, but eventually you are going to be forced into an ARM-based Windows computer, okay? So there's a lot of things that aren't really told to you. yes, you are told that faster RAM does equivalent to a little bit more speed, but it's more about how much RAM you have. Now, Windows, for example, on a fresh boot of the OS, right to the desktop, now I have Windows 11 on my PC. It's a gamer laptop, but it makes no difference, okay? Now, with 64 gigs of RAM in my computer, Windows is taking 9 gigs of that RAM away from me just to the desktop. Now, here's something you're not told. Whenever you fire up a program under Windows, okay, Mac OS is the same, by the way, you don't get this RAM back, okay? So if you only have 8 gigs of RAM in your computer, in your Windows laptop, a lot of them do, okay, unless you're buying a higher end machine, right? You're only going to get 8 gigs. You might even get 4 gigs. There's a lot of laptops out there still and desktops being supplied with only 4 gigs of RAM, which you only need 4 gigs of RAM to install Windows 11. But everything is 100% virtual memory, which is swap, which is going to really bog your performance of your computer down. So even if you had, say, an 8-core processor machine that's running really high performance speeds, you know, like 3 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz, whatever, that means nothing. If you don't have enough RAM, you're taking a big hit. Okay, now even with an SSD, you are still going to take a rather large hit. Not as large as you would with a hard drive for it accessing virtual, but you're still going to take a pretty big hit regardless. PCs still don't know how to work stuff right, like Apple actually does know how to work stuff properly. To a certain point, we'll get to that, don't worry. There's still a performance hit for the Mac people. But you're not getting this RAM back. You compile RAM. So, as an example, let's pull up our calculator here. Windows wants 9 gigs of RAM. Now, let's say you have a game, okay? One of the most popular high-end AAA titles in the last while has been Cyberpunk 2077. It's a really hardcore, raunchy game. It wants a lot of processing power. It definitely wants 8 gigs of video power, real video power, not, RAM-based. Okay, it wants real video card of 8 gigs. But it also wants that 16 gigs of RAM to itself. Now, it will run on less, yes, but it performs very lousy in comparison. Okay, so even if you have everything else spec'd out, but you're still lacking in video power, now your video cards will also access system RAM in order to compensate for the loss or missing video RAM. And that slows down your video RAM when you're using system RAM because your system RAM is not near as fast as your video RAM is. So your video RAM gets slowed down to system RAM speeds in order to compensate the difference, allowing you to still play the game, still with a performance hit. But if you had a real 8 gig video card, you would definitely be seeing some really incredible performance if everything else is matched up properly too. So, but let's say we need 16 gigs of RAM, okay, which we do for that game. So 9 gigs for Windows plus 16 for Cyberpunk. Now, that's 25 gigs of RAM already you need in your computer to give the application what it wants as far as memory goes, and you're still got Windows that's going to be running in the background, still chewing up its 9 gigs. So this is all compiled. You can see the same thing in a web browser. Check your task manager. You'll see the same thing going on. Now, let's say you only have a 4 gig video card like I do. Okay, I've got an NVIDIA 3050 video card. It's got 4 gigs of video RAM on it. I still need another 4. Now, Cyberpunk can run on 4, but if it sees the 16 already, it's going to put everything into recommended specs, which means it's going to require 8 gigs of video. Now, even if it's slower video, it's still going to work. So there's an extra 4 gigs. So plus 4, that's 29 gigabytes worth of RAM that you need. Now, this same math applies to all your programs, including video editing software. And there are some video editors out there that just want 16 gigs just to fire up before you even drop a file into them. Okay, so you have to know this about your software. This is where understanding computers is a big thing. You gotta really understand this stuff so that you don't end up, screwing yourself over, right? And having a very crappy experience, being frustrated and you don't know why. I'm here to tell you why you're having a crappy experience and how to fix that, okay? So that's 29 gigs. So now I have 64. Now if I only had 32 gigs of RAM, I would still be okay, because I still have an extra 3 gigs before I hit swap, right? Now, that's all fine and dandy. We're at 29. Now, if we minus that from 64, we get 35 gigs left over to do whatever. Okay, now that means we could have another app running in the background, but then we slow down the performance of our computer. This is why I tell people, you know what, no matter how much RAM you have, no matter what you got going, run one program at a time to get optimal performance out of that program that's in the front, okay? Now, what Google Chrome does nowadays is it actually will shut down your other tabs to a certain point, okay, and have the frontmost tab be the most active. But the more tabs you have open, you are chewing more and more and more and more RAM. Okay, that's the thing, and that's just one program. So that one program keeps compiling more memory as you open more tabs, and that can get quite extensive depending on how many tabs you have. So you want to try and control things, especially if you have a lower RAM spec machine, right? But even with a higher spec machine, you know, yeah, you could still get away with a lot of tabs open, you could do other things, but you're still giving your computer a performance hit because you're making your CPU and your GPU work even harder and harder. Now your GPU just had what it needed and you got stuff going on in the background. Well, guess what? Now it's going to have to take more to share with others, or the other program takes more to share with the others. So this now takes all your RAM usage more and more, that you have less and less RAM available. And I got 64 gigs in here, so do some math here, you'll figure this out, okay? Now, with that being all said and done, that is the way things work in that aspect. Now, as far as your SSD goes, the faster it is that you can put in there that will work at those speeds, the better it's going to be. Now, the limitations are with PCI Express 3, you cannot go beyond 3500 by 3500, okay? With Express 4, we're pretty much capped at just over 7,000, okay, read-writes, okay? Now, we do have Express 5 systems out, not very many right now, mind you, on the open market, but in the consumer market, you definitely have Express 4, Express 3 as a normal kind of everyday thing for SSDs that are easily replaceable in the majority of PCs. Now, of course, if you only have an Express 3, like I said, you are going to be capped at 35 by 35, which that doesn't mean you're going to get to that speed. It's always an up to rating. You can achieve up to that. Some drives will run those speeds that they're rated for. Some will not run near those speeds. Even though they're rated for them, doesn't mean they're going to run that fast. There's a lot of variables here. Now, I have a Crucial drive sitting in my computer that's rated for 5,000 by something or other. It's an Express 4, and it's in an Express 4 slot. It actually runs slightly above manufacturer's specs. And my PCI Express 3 slot has a 3500 by 3500 drive the drive that's in there is actually rated for 7,000 by 6,000, but it can only run at 35 by 35 easily because it's a higher performance drive. It's an Express 4 drive and Express 3 slot. I can get that. But if I put an Express 3 drive in there rated for 35 by 35, I generally see around 3,000 read and about 2,600 write, okay, in that Express 3 slot. But if I put the same drive into an Express 4 slot, I get closer to that 35 by 35, okay? It's kind of weird the way it works, but that's how it works. So now we know a little bit more about this. Now, for the Mac people out there, of course, we've got you covered too. Now, with the M1 processors from Apple, okay, the very first Apple ARM chips, okay, the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro with Touch Bar, the iMac, and the Mac Mini were all limited to 16 gigabytes of RAM. That was it, okay? They all came with 8, but you could actually custom order your computer with 16 gigs, and they maxed out at 2 terabyte. Now, of the Apple ARM chips from M1 to M2, these were definitely the faster drives that we got in all the M1s, period, because they would easily run over 3,000 plus megabytes per second. Now, in the first 4 computers I named from Apple, I know for a fact that those things all run around very close to that 3,000 megabit per sec or megabyte per second range. And of course, pro level laptops ran a lot faster, etc. Okay. Now, with M2 technology, your same books generally ran at about half the speed of the M1s. And it's like, that makes no sense. Even in a 256, yes. and you didn't get any extra speed until you went 512 or a terabyte. Where with the M1s, where they went 256, 512, 1 or 2 terabyte, in the 4 M1s I mentioned, those all ran the same kind of speeds, right? You didn't get bottlenecked. Apple bottlenecked us in the M2s with a bunch of them. Now, I have 16 gigabytes of RAM in this computer. I'm running the latest version of Mac OS Sonoma, and it is only chewing up 5.89 gigabytes just to the desktop. So again, the same math applies. You go and you fire up a program that might not use a lot of RAM, like even iMovie. It doesn't use a lot of RAM to fire up the program, okay? But when you start adding more files in, or starting to add files, it uses more RAM. Same as Google Chrome is the same, Mac and PC. You open it up, it's going to use a bunch of RAM, and the more tabs you have open, the more it's going to suck up. Now, I know that when I open up about 4 tabs, which is usually Hotmail, Gmail, and Facebook, and YouTube, I am already using upwards to almost 10 gigs of my RAM out of my 16 in my computer, just with Chrome. So do I want to go and do a video editing project? Well, if it's a single 4K or 1080p file, and that's all there is to it, which is pretty general for me, then fine, I could do that. Now, my exporting time or rendering time is going to take a hit, because normally those files, at about 20 minutes tops, usually export within about 3 minutes flat if I have no other programs running. But if I start running other programs, I increase my rendering time or export time. Same thing you do on a PC. More crap you got open, the more your major project, in this case, gets slowed down. No matter how fast your drive is, you're getting slowed down. Even if you have a lot of system RAM left over, you've got a fast computer. Makes no difference. The more crap you make your computer do for CPU and GPU and RAM requirements, etc., the more you do slow your computer down. Okay, so that's kind of a given. Now, the wonderful thing about Mac OS Sonoma that's a little bit different than Windows is Sonoma has what's called gamer mode. And what that does, something that Windows doesn't have the capability of, is that when I go and I launch a game, right now I'm using 5.89 gigs. So when I go to launch a game, for example, could be any game, okay, it frees up anywhere between 2 to 3 gigs of this memory right here now and pushes that for the allowance for gaming, which makes our games a lot better, especially in a lower RAM situation. I've even seen this with my MacBook Air with 8 gigs of RAM in it. I'm using, almost 6 gigs for the OS. It leaves me 2 gigs. That ain't a lot, especially for Minecraft, right? But it goes into gamer mode, and then Minecraft gets more RAM to it because now the OS has freed up a lot of RAM, so I can play that game and also avoid swap for quite a long time. So the most RAM I've ever seen in use was about 7 gigs of RAM in Minecraft. Now, Minecraft is not a good game to play on a MacBook Air M1 because, well, it heats the suckers up quite a lot. The Airs run extremely hot because they have no fans, they have no vents, they have no kind of cooling whatsoever. This is a drawback in laptops, but even in all Mac laptops, they have the fans in anything above a MacBook Air, but they still have no ventilation ports to draw in more air from, other than maybe little leaks in the keyboard or leaks in the ports. They may be able to draw some cool air in from there, but not a whole lot, and they can run really hot for video editing. This is why desktops are the best thing to have if you're a video editor and you're doing gaming. But if you're doing low-level tasking or mid-level tasking, then yeah, desktop or laptop is just fine. No problem, okay? Now, we can't do anything really about SSDs or faster RAM in ARM chips on Apple Silicon because, well, it's prefix speed of the RAM. It's called unified RAM too, which is a whole other thing to get into. But it's a different kind of a speed of RAM, and it is extremely fast. So are our processors, but then again, we have performance cores, efficiency cores, all that to deal with. But we're dealing with a lot of similarities between the Mac and the Windows OS, right? But at least with the Mac OS, that RAM is freed up when you're in game mode playing video games on your computer. It frees up a lot of that system RAM. It's too bad Windows hasn't figured out how to do that yet. Now, the only drawback to that system is we don't know what it's cutting off, okay? So we may go and launch a program after we're done playing our game, and the program may not run. Or maybe it might turn on those resources. Who knows? But the simplest way to get the RAM back for sure, so that you know you have all those background tasks turned back on that need to be there for certain programs already on load up, well, that is called restarting your computer, and then you're back to using your 6 gigs of RAM again, and then you know at least you can launch any app you want. It's going to fire up and you're good to go. Okay. Now, every time you fire an app on a computer, it takes longer the first time you fire it up as opposed to the next time you fire it up, providing you haven't restarted your computer or done a complete shutdown. Okay. So as long as it's up and running, it'll launch basically instantaneously the next time around. So as an example of that, let's take something like, let me just get my mouse back here to my Mac and my keyboard. So let's take a program like, say, Logic. It's pretty, it chews up a little bit, right? It's going to take quite a few bounces before the app actually completely starts to fire up, and then we're ready to go. And then we can also see, once we are fired up, how much RAM it uses before we even do anything, okay? So let's just go into an audio project, and we're right here. Now, we haven't even done anything, and we're at 6.9 gigs worth of RAM in use. Okay, no big deal. We start adding a pile of files in there, a couple hundred of them, it's going to start chewing up a lot of RAM. That's the whole thing between video and audio stuff and other types of video and video stuff, is that's how it works. You start putting stuff in and it uses up RAM. But the program in itself, if we look up Logic in our list, it only uses 397 megabytes of memory in order to just fire up. And part of that is graphics too within that amount, right? In this case, it's going to use graphics and main program. Now, if we go and we quit this program, we may or may not get a full release of that RAM. And in most cases, we actually don't get a complete full release back to the system, but we're pretty close. We're within margin of a couple hundred, megabytes out of the gigabyte range, right? So we're at 6.2 gigs. But if we fire this program up again, one bounce now, and it's instantaneous, and we can get into the program extremely fast, and away we go. We're ready to rock and roll much faster the second time around, okay? There's always little leftover pieces that stay there so that this can happen. But the first time you launch the app, it's a little slower, okay? And that applies to any Mac computer, not just Apple Silicon, okay? So hopefully this has helped explain more about, RAM and RAM speeds and SSD. You need as fast as SSDs you can get. It's going to help you a lot, okay? The more RAM does help you quite a bit, okay? It doesn't necessarily make your computer majorly faster, but it is going to allow you to not end up in swap so easily or at all, so that you will get peak performance out of said configuration of your CPU and your GPU, etc. And your GPU, of course, it's going to have whatever it has, whether it's integrated like an ARM chip or whether it's a separate video card, along with, you could actually have an Intel graphics built in as well, which my PC has both. It has a separate NVIDIA graphics, and then it also has the other side of the fence where it has the Intel stuff, which actually sucks for gaming, but NVIDIA works better because it's a real graphics card. So, programs are getting more and more demanding. The demand on higher performance computers is also there too. We'll talk about newer chips in another video, because there's been a lot of changes that actually are quite surprising me in the PC realm right now, that I think are actually going to go for the worst end on a lot of people, because they're going to find out that, maybe I shouldn't have bought that. Okay, but we'll talk about that in the next one. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll be sure to catch you on the next one. All right, see ya.